So hello again, my name is Aleksey, and I'm a country manager at Penny. I'm in charge of Baltic states, Russia, and CIS countries. So today my goal is to share with you the latest insights on mobile gaming market, what happened in 2018, and what's probably gonna happen in 2019, like what would be the logical continuity of those trends. And also, for the first time in the second part of my presentation, I'm going to share some practical tools on how to assess a genre if you're trying to enter with a new game into a new genre, a genre that you haven't been before. So again, for the first time, because generally we're talking about trends, but since I'm working also not only with prospects but with clients in this region, I'm learning from them, and that is the result of us working together for a while. And for those of you who do not know what a Penny does, we provide competitive intelligence to our customers. By competitive intelligence, we mean you can learn about competing games, how well they monetize, how well they retain users, what ad networks they're using, and what creatives they're using to promote their games, and specifically in what specific apps they're placing their ads. Those are just a few of our customers. Overall, we have over 1,000 companies paying to us, and even more companies using our free products, such as a Penny Connect, that you can connect your own titles to and see in one dashboard all the ad revenue, ad spend, downloads, and revenue from different platforms. And now, off to the main trends in 2018. The main thing that happened in 2018 is, as usual, mobile gaming keeps growing, and what started in 2017, mobile gaming outgrew all other platforms combined. These slides we put together with IDC, and IDC was mainly responsible for the all other platforms, and we were mainly responsible for the mobile gaming estimates of these markets. And if this trend continues, and it's likely to continue, the mobile gaming would be 60% of all the revenue in 2019. And by revenue here, I mean only for mobile parts, only in-app purchases and first paid downloads, which is a smaller part. So no ad revenue even. So if you add ad revenue on top of that, you will see that mobile gaming is making more money than even more than 60% in 2019. Now we off to some specific countries, and I'm going to start with China. That's market number one. This is the largest market, and it's not going to change in the foreseeable future. The growth has decelerated in China for the obvious reasons. For those of you who know, there was a content freeze in the second half of the year on iOS, and that really impacted the growth rates on iOS. But still, Chinese market is more than twice, almost twice the size of the US market, which is the second one. And US market is growing faster than that of Japan. So on these slides, it's not places 2 through 10, it's just some countries, because you will have a different list of the places 1 through 10. But here, this is just to give you a picture, for example, how big is Indian markets compared to the US one. And what's really what you should pay attention to is that, for example, Japanese market and that of South Korea grew only 7% year on year in terms of consumer spend. Consumer spend and revenue, those are pretty much the same terms. The only difference is that revenue is what companies get after the platform, and consumer spend is what the users actually spend, so including the platform's share. So those two can be used interchangeably. And United States, for the first time in 3 years, they took the second place from Japan, and it's likely to be this way. If we look at individual revenue year-on-year growth rates for different countries, for different platforms, we'll see some striking examples there. For example, Japan on iOS posted negative growth rates year-on-year. And why? How could it be? And how could, because in China we at least have an explanation. while in the US we saw a very solid growth rate. So Google Play growth rate is orange one, and iOS growth rate is a blue one. And the answer to that, how could it be? Then on some markets you tend to see like the slowdown of the growth rate in terms of consumer spend. Like the answer is very simple. My colleagues from our HQ in San Francisco, they came up with this market maturity model that pretty much sums up what happens on every single market at any single point in time. So, for example, just you see a new market just forming, and the first thing that happens, you will see that the gray curve, that the gray line, that's the number of downloads. People are downloading many, many apps. They're experimenting. They're seeing what works for them. And then, as they kind of experimented, this phase is over, and they start spending more time in those apps that they deemed useful for them. And this is where this second line, which is the green line, started going up. That is the time spent in apps. And revenue is the third, like last one. When people like grew really accustomed to those apps, only then they started spending money in those apps. And this is why, like for example, in India right now, we are seeing like huge growth rate in terms of downloads, both for games and non-games, but it's still like a very, very mature market at the moment, and that will definitely go through all those stages later on. And we're going to speak about Indian markets in a second. But like what you should pay attention to is that Japanese market is more mature. Second one, you see, for example, for China, you have two flags. One is in between Japan and US, and the reason for that is that those are the users from tier 1 and tier 2 cities, like the largest cities. And for the most part, they're behaving like very developed countries. And most of those, not most of those users, but almost all of iOS users, they are right there. And so that's exactly the reason China, like going back to the previous slides, China has like this growth on iOS, which slowed down over recent period of time, and Japan had a negative growth. So like they hit the plateau, and sometimes in several years, they like over several years, we can see even either same consumer spend level or even negative growth year on year. This is the top 10 countries in terms of revenue generated in the world right now for mobile gaming. We're talking about the numbers on iOS and Google Play combined for 2018. And the logical conclusion from that would be, okay, yeah, probably you would need to find ways to be present at those APAC markets, like China, Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan. But the trick is, the problem is, those markets are not that open. So when you're trying to enter those markets, like for example Chinese markets, even like largest and most experienced Western companies, it's very rare to see their titles go higher than top 40 gross in China, with all the marketing budgets that they have, with all the experience. So those markets are very, very hard to penetrate. So here on this slide, we're looking at the percentage, the share of foreign games in the top 20 grossing games in each single country. And local games, those are the blue ones, and the green ones are the foreign games. But the problem is, like those foreign games, they come from the same region. So again, like if we look here at the top 20 games, still, like most of them, like predominantly out of China, Japan, South Korea, we'll have, for all those three markets, we will have only one game from Supercell at 20th place in one of those markets, and that's it. We wouldn't have any Western games in the top 20. The rest would be from local brands, let's say. And this is something to be aware of. So that what this leaves us with? This leaves us with the understanding that you would need to focus probably on the Western markets still, while if you have possibility, of course, go to those markets, try to still like very decent money can be made there, and that's still a possibility. But we see a reverse trend. This slide is about Chinese companies going to developing markets and pretty much taking over those markets. On the left, you see like the top growth in January and March 2019 in Russia. On the right, you see top 15, again, top grossing games in Saudi Arabia. And it's crazy. Right now, like 40% or more spots on those top 15 grossing charts are taken by Chinese companies in all those countries. Like Taiwan, Malaysia, Indonesia, India, United Arab Emirates, and 60 or more % in the following countries: Russia, Saudi Arabia, Hong Kong, Thailand, Singapore, and Philippines. If you think about it, they keep their markets closed pretty much to other gaming publishers, but they managed to enter the developing markets, and that's going to continue. But right now, the trend is that they're super successful in mid-core and less successful in casual. And why is that? And we try to analyze like why it's exactly the case, and the only reason, and they are not so successful, for example, in casino games. So like casino and casual, quite hard to penetrate for them. And the reason for that is that in casual and casino games, people tend to play multiple games at once. So it's easier to build an ecosystem like King did, like Playrix did, like Big Games did, Gem City. So like all those companies, they build an ecosystem. If the user gets in, it's like you are basically competing with all their titles, not just one title. And this is the reason Chinese companies right now, they need to pick their fights, and they are more successful in mid-core in general. But like second most important thing, like on this slide, you are seeing the revenue distribution for Chinese companies across different regions, main regions, and they're super successful in APAC. That's obvious. Then because like they are pretty much owning not only Chinese market, but like the markets that we talked about on the previous slide. Also, they're quite successful in EMEA, because like in EMEA, you still have many developing markets, and they're less successful in America. And they're less successful in general in developed countries for two reasons. In developed countries, what we're seeing is that there is a tilt towards casual gaming a little bit, especially on iOS. And that's the main reason that prevents them. But from what I talked to, from what I discussed with different gaming companies in our region, they're saying that's probably there would be time when we'll see more of Chinese companies also in casual, when they will exhaust the growth in mid-core. That is what is leave us with. You should still probably focus more on US markets, on Western markets. And if we are speaking about US markets, let's take a look at the revenue distribution for top 100 games in the United States. You will see here that there was a shift like towards casual. And but like, don't get me wrong, this shift is not as dramatic. It shouldn't be as dramatic. And the main reason this slide shook up this way is because like Machine Zone stopped supporting at the same level its like main two titles in 2016, which are Game of War and Mobile Strike. And that's the main reason, because like those games were huge, but not stopped supporting, but like stopped spending as much on UA. And without UA, those titles shrinked in size, and this is what influenced like this dramatic shift. But all in all, even with that aside, I can tell you that casual grew a bit faster than mid-core, so this shift is indeed in place, but it doesn't look as dramatic. And casual here, we are looking at casual is light blue, and mid-core is green. So we're still seeing that the revenue generated by casual grew substantially in between 2016 and 2018. and that's gonna still continue from what we're seeing. Because like right now, speaking of the genres, and we're gonna go to the genres in a second, we're seeing more across like two genre games, or games with the main genre and the meta game. And that really is the fuel behind like future growth in casual. This is what we're seeing. And speaking of mid-core, again, this dip was mainly due to the fact that because of Machine Zone, but other than that, if we look, for example, let's look for a second at casual again. This is like casual puzzle, which is the main driver behind the growth of casual titles, and the main game in casual puzzle that benefited from this growth in 2018 would be Toon Blast. And that is mid-core RPG, like one segment that wasn't impacted by Machine Zone titles slowing down. And as you can see, growth here, both in terms of RPU and in terms of revenue change. Speaking of hot genres in 2018, we cannot really not mention the two main genres that see a major increase in downloads and revenue. That would be Battle Royale and of course hyper casual. And here, like on this slide, you are seeing top 5 free titles for every single country. And what struck me the most when looking at this slide is that Indian top 5 titles, like most downloads in India in 2018, looks pretty much like top 3 for some Western country like 5 years ago. And the logical explanation to that would be right now, like India experiencing a growth in the number of devices, and most of the devices that are being added, like low-end devices. And so that is one of the main reasons we see that fact. And hyper casual, like super successful in all Western markets. Battle Royale is super successful across the board. But if we talk about hyper casual, if we take hyper casual aside, like from what we are seeing is that the number of downloads for all the companies in hyper casual, so this market reached its peak in Q3 2018. That is the number of downloads for all the companies combined that has predominantly a hyper casual portfolio of games. And right now it's a more mature market. You still will see the new companies entering this market and being successful there. That's for sure. Like for example, right now, Say Games, a company from Belarus, has a very successful entry. Had very successful entry with Drive and Park, and right now launched several new titles that are being in the top 3 in many countries. But still, it's a way more mature market. Right now, the companies are just fighting each other for the market share, and it's going to be this way. Speaking of Battle Royale. Again, it was a huge hit, a huge success in March, in April, but it stayed at the same level in most Western countries, so it didn't went down. Here you are looking at the number of MAU users combined for all Battle Royale titles in the United States being just the lightest blue, all the way through Japan and South Korea to United Kingdom being the darkest blue. But Battle Royale titles, they kept growing in terms of MAU numbers in developing countries, and especially in India. India is the top line on this slide. And you see that in India, Brazil, Indonesia, and Turkey, we saw the number of MAU users, monthly active users, increasing in all those countries. And that's pretty much it about like the major trends. We see more of companies going into new genres or combining the genres that were combined before, and we expect that trend to continue. And And right now, let me focus on key points when you are trying to enter a new genre. So, for example, of course, you need to have the expertise. You need to know how to build a good game just for a new genre, a solid game. But still, like when picking a new genre, what things you need to take into consideration? And in our experience, that would be like those 4 main things. Of course, as you read like those 4 things, I'm gonna like the first and the most obvious one is there enough money on this in this particular niche? Like what is the size of the market in US dollars and what is the growth rate? But when speaking about like points 2 and 3, Hirschman-Herfindahl index for revenue in genre and cross-up usage, I'm going to give you the examples. So what is HH index? HH index tells you about how concentrated the market is, whether it's more concentrated or less concentrated. And on the right side of the slide, you can read how it's calculated. So basically, it's a sum of the squares of the market shares of the games, of the revenue of games, for example. And you see 2 examples, one on the left and one on the right. And like in your head, try to answer that question. What market you'd rather be in? Left or right? And of course, you would want to be on the right market because like less dominance by one players. And this is what this Hirschman-Herfindahl index is all about. And for casual games especially and for other games as well, it's very helpful just to build this index, not just with the standalone titles, but by companies. So by grouping all the revenues from all the, let's say, match 3 titles by King into King. And same with player, etc., etc. That would give you like a much better understanding of how concentrated or less concentrated the market is. And cross-up usage, this is the screen from our tool. It shows you the cross-up usage and affinity for Candy Crush Soda Saga. It basically gives you the idea like what other games the players of Candy Crush Soda Saga also played in March 2018 on iOS, 2019 on iOS. Like here, you see 2 tables. First one, by which this whole table is sorted, is affinity, and second one is cross-up usage. Let me stop there for a second. So cross-up usage percentage. If we take all the users of Candy Crush Soda Saga in a given month, and we look at them carefully, we will see that of those 100% of the Candy Crush Soda Saga users, let's say 35%, like in this case, also played game Z. And like here is imaginary example. But that is what cross-up usage is about. So like of all the users of one game, particular game, what percentage also played the other game. That is like, for example, we can see here that of all the Candy Crush Soda Saga users, 21% also played in March 2019 on iOS played Candy Crush Jelly Saga. For example, this is how it's calculated. And the second part is about affinity. And affinity is a bit different thing. So like if you look at all the at our usage panel in a given country, of all those users, for example, like a given percent of them played Candy Crush Jelly Saga. But when we shrink all those users in our panel to only those ones who played Candy Crush Soda Saga, then you get the picture, then you get the multiplier. And this is exactly the multiplier. So like compared to the general population, when we go to only Candy Crush Soda Saga users, 32 times more users are playing Candy Crush Jelly Saga within this like new panel. So like how to use those two concepts like of cross-up and HH index. You can build this model. And on this model, like x-axis would be the HH index for revenue in genre, and going from most concentrated on the left to least concentrated on the right. And On the y-axis, you will have cross-up usage. And cross-up usage here is the level of competition. From going from high at the beginning of the axis to low at the top. And basically, like those two circles, like big, and how big circle is, that's the total revenue in genre. And like this big red circle represents traditional match-3 games. It's, yeah, a lot of revenue there, a lot of revenue. But the problem is, like, it's super concentrated, and its very level of competition is super high. That's the problem. And by comparison, the orange circle would be match-3 games that that have match-3 elements in them, but they're customization games, like home design makeover. It's a relatively open market. And Chinese companies entering right now the casual markets, they're entering exactly like those niches that are open, like chapters in story-based games. So that is the idea of how to select a genre for your new game if you are new to it. Okay, let's say genre is selected. What's next? The next, I'm going to just focus on only one thing, and that is benchmarking. Let's say that is the benchmark for average revenue per install for 2 months and then 6 months for one specific genre. And as you can see, average revenue per install is growing over time. So if after 2 months it was, let's say, $2, after 6 months it would be $6, something like that. So it kept growing. But it grows within, let's say, boundaries. So if you have below 170 after 2 months, it's not realistic to expect more than $5 ARPI after 12 months. And so even at launch, by comparing yourself, by benchmarking yourself against the competition, you can really get the picture whether you have the case to successfully compete against other guys like in this specific genre. And in this particular case, if, for example, your ARPI, because like that's like top games launches from day 0 to day 60, for example, for the first 3 columns, if you have ARPI for 2 months that is less than $1, probably you'd better go and work on your game than burn your marketing budget. And to sum it up, again, like first, you need to understand like how big the market is and whether it's growing. Then you need to use like HH index and cross-up usage to understand like what's the real competition there. And is it really easy to enter this market? Will it be really easy for you or not? And then you would need like to at least get an understanding of the monetization. What is required to be successful in this specific genre? And that would be it. Thank you so much. If you have any questions.
Aleksey, thanks very much. I find looking at these numbers endlessly fascinating. And we have a question here. And a mic is coming.
Thanks for your talk. I've got a quick question about one of the first slides when you showed the dynamics of the mobile market comparing to all other markets. And in the commentary, I saw that this is about PlayStation and Xbox. Are the Steam sales counted in that graph?
As far as I understand, I'm not sure about that. Like, honest answer would be I'm not sure about that because like this slide was built by our HQ. I guess so, but I'm not completely sure, so I cannot.
Aleksey, can I ask one more question?
Yeah.
So the information is fascinating and business critical. You showed a lot of big companies which are using it, and my understanding is, the full package is, not cheap. For startups, less well-funded startups, how can they work with you? What's the intro?
Yeah, so the smallest package would be around $15K a year, and that would be enough just to get the understanding of the biggest markets, US market. And that would include downloads and revenue numbers, that would include MAU, DAU numbers, as well as open rates, which is like the closest thing to retention without having the actual retention. And that will include ASO for smaller sized companies, because like the size of the company also plays a role when determining the price.
Okay. Any more questions in the audience? Aleksey, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.